The gentle hills sharpen under frost. The long, straight lanes turn white and silent, and the villages, usually so warm with honey-colored stone, seem to draw in on themselves at dusk, keeping their secrets close. Smoke drifts from chimneys. Lamps glow behind leaded panes. Snow collects in the folds of dry stone walls and along the ridges of ancient roofs. By day, it can look like something from a Christmas card. Postcard villages, carols floating from church doors, market stalls beneath timbered arches. But when night settles, when the wind moves through the hedgerows and the bells stop ringing, the older Cotswolds wake. For centuries, people across these hills have shared ghost stories at Christmas. Long before fairy lights, long before tinsel, there were tales told beside low fires, of travelers caught in sudden storms, of lanterns seen on lost roads, of figures walking the snowy commons long after their time had passed. The dark of midwinter makes such stories easier to believe. Perhaps the veil between past and present really is thinner in December, or perhaps the land simply remembers more at this time of year. Tonight, we wander the Cotswolds in their deepest winter hour, moving quietly from village to village, from wood to hilltop, to listen to 5 such tales. Stories of those who could not leave their Christmas night behind, and of the living who crossed their paths. If you grow drowsy as we travel, let the stories fold around you like snowfall. The hills will keep watch, the old roads will guide us. Now, settle back, let the lights dim, and keep to the lantern glow. Our first tale begins on a long rising road, where the snow never quite settles the way it should. The storm had followed Sarah halfway across the Cotswolds. By the time she reached the southern edge of the hills, the snow had turned sharp and needling, slithering under her scarf and stinging her eyes. The simple winter break she had promised herself, rest, quiet, distance from the year's exhaustion, had already become a white-knuckled journey along narrowing lanes. Twice she nearly turned back. Twice she kept going. Tetbury appeared at last as a scatter of lantern-warm windows on a slope, a small town holding out against the weather. She eased the car downhill into the market square. The great timbered hall stood on its stone legs like a patient animal, snow drifting around it. Beyond, narrow streets wound away between old shopfronts and coaching inns. Her B&B sat just off the square. The owner, a brisk woman in a red jumper, handed her a key and said, "Quiet night. Bells later, if you've a mind for them." Sarah wasn't sure she did. She only wanted warmth and stillness. But when she stepped out again to find something to eat, the cold felt different, more watchful. That was when she noticed him. A man stood under the shelter of the market hall, half hidden between 2 pillars. His coat was long and heavy, his hat pulled low, his posture rigid. Snow fell all around him, but not on him. The flakes seemed to bend away, leaving a bare ring of stone at his feet. She blinked. A brass trio passed her carrying their instruments. Someone laughed nearby. And when she looked again, he was gone. Snow deepened overnight. When she woke, only a muted winter glow leaked around the curtains. A single bell sounded somewhere in town, slow and deliberate. It felt like a pulse. She spent the afternoon wandering the streets as the Christmas Eve light faded. Shops were closing, wreaths hung on doors, and smoke drifted from chimneys. Tetbury seemed to be folding itself into quiet. She returned to the square just as dusk took hold, and he was there again. The same figure beneath the hall, same odd circle of bare stone, same posture, as if braced against a wind she couldn't feel. He stared down Long Street, the road leading out of town toward the high country. This time, he turned toward her. "You're late," he said. His voice was soft but carried easily. His breath didn't smoke in the cold. "I think you've mistaken me," she managed. "For the coach," he said simply. When she didn't answer, he pointed down the street. and the world flickered. For a heartbeat, the modern road dissolved into a snow-choked track. Cars vanished, lanterns swung on iron brackets. A dark coach waited at the far end, horses steaming in the cold. Sarah blinked hard, and Tetbury returned. "You saw it," he murmured. "Most don't." Her pulse quickened. "What happened to you?" He hesitated, then spoke like someone repeating a story he'd told too often. There was a storm. Drifts higher than the horse's knees, wind like wire. His gloved fist closed. The man in the counting house wouldn't open the stables, not unless the passengers paid for rooms, so we kept to the road. I walked in front with the lantern to find the ruts. He looked past her as though seeing them again. The snow filled them quicker than I could read them. "You were the coachman?" she asked. "Ostler," he corrected quietly. "Held the horses. Knew their tempers, knew we shouldn't have gone out at all. Did people die?" Some colour seemed to drain from him. "Enough. And you?" "Not that night," he said. "Some nights are worse if you live through them." A swirl of snow moved through the hall, but none of it touched him. The bells above began ringing for the Christmas Eve service. People hurried across the square, oblivious to the two of them. "You should go inside," she said gently. "Warm up." He gave a small, rueful sound. "Haven't crossed a warm threshold in a century." He stepped out from the shadow. The world flickered again, deeper this time. The square dimmed, lanterns glowed, snow piled into drifts that hadn't been there a moment before. She felt the cold reach through her coat as if it recognized her. "Walk with me," he said, "just to the corner." Her feet moved before she agreed. They stepped out onto Long Street together. The air changed. Under her boots, the snow felt older, heavier, shaped by long-lost wheels. Her ankle twisted sharply on an unseen ridge. Pain shot up her leg and she gasped, grabbing a shop front for balance. In that instant, the modern world snapped back. Pavement, car tires, electric lights. He stopped, watching her with a strange mixture of regret and recognition. "One misstep," he said softly. "That's all it ever takes on this road." "I should go back," she said, breathless. He nodded. "Some people still can." "You could come with me," she offered before thinking. "Just this once." His expression shifted. Not quite sorrow, not quite hope. The road into Northleash narrowed between high hedgerows, their branches heavy with frost. Daniel had been driving for hours, trying to outrun the feeling that Christmas was arriving faster than he could endure. He had promised himself a quiet break, a single night somewhere old and peaceful, somewhere that didn't demand anything of him. A colleague had suggested Northleach. "Beautiful at Christmas," she'd said, "and the old church is stunning." Stunning wasn't quite the word he'd use when he first saw it. The church of St. Peter and St. Paul rose above the market town like a ship's hull carved from pale stone, its vast windows black against the late December sky. The wind threaded through the churchyard, making the trees creak. Even from the road, it felt like a place holding something back. His room at the inn was warm enough, though the radiators clicked and groaned as if protesting the cold. After dropping his bag, he stepped out to explore before the last light disappeared. The streets were quiet, only a few houses showed signs of life, wreaths on doors, candles flickering behind thick glass. Northleach felt suspended, as if the whole town had taken a breath it hadn't yet released. The church door was ajar. He hesitated. He wasn't a believer, particularly. Christmas meant time off, not devotion. But something about the glow inside drew him in. Perhaps he just wanted to stand somewhere vast and silent, to let the weight of the year finally unwind. The door opened without a sound. Warm air drifted out, tinged with the faint scents of candle wax and old wood. Inside, the nave stretched high and bare, lit by a handful of hanging lamps that made the air shimmer. The famous rood screen cast a latticework of shadow across the flagstones. Rows of choir stalls, carved centuries ago by skilled hands, curved toward the chancel. Daniel walked slowly, taking in the hush. Then he heard singing. It was faint at first, a single voice, wordless, somewhere near the chancel arch. A warm, resonant sound, as if someone were testing the acoustics before a service. He stepped closer. The voice deepened and multiplied, a soft layering of harmonies, the kind that lifts the air. He should have felt soothed, but something in the sound was wrong. The notes bent ever so slightly off-center, slipping into intervals no trained choir would use. They seemed to vibrate inside his ribs. His hands prickled with cold. He leaned to look around the edge of the screen. No one. Just rows of empty choir stalls, each seat carved with misericords. Strange creatures, twisted foliage, grimacing faces. Their expressions gleamed faintly in the candlelight as though reacting to the song. Daniel stepped back. The singing stopped. A new sound replaced it, the rustle of cloth. He looked up sharply. A figure stood in the chancel doorway, swathed in a dark cloak that brushed the floor, its hood pulled low. For a moment, Daniel couldn't tell if the figure faced him or away from him. The stillness was too absolute. "Hello," he said, his voice thin in the cavernous space. The figure did not move. No greeting, no explanation. Daniel's instinct told him to leave, but he felt rooted, the air around him thickening. He managed a small nod and forced himself to walk calmly toward the door. The lamps swayed overhead, though he felt no draft. As he reached the heavy wooden door, the singing resumed. Louder, richer, rising in strange ascending steps that felt like hands climbing his spine. He stepped outside abruptly, breath steaming, and the sound cut off at once. He told himself it was a rehearsal, perhaps for a midnight service. Perhaps the cloaked figure was a verger or chorister, but unease followed him back to the inn, settling into the corners of his thoughts. When he woke in the night, the room was pitch black. Only the ticking of the radiator filled the silence. No, not ticking. A keening note hovered behind the sound, a single held pitch, so faint he thought he might be imagining it. Then a second note rose and twined around it, the same uncanny harmony he'd heard in the church. Daniel sat up, heart thudding. The sound seeped through the walls like cold water. He got dressed and stepped outside, boots crunching on the frosted ground. The night sky over Northleach glowed with a pale, colourless sheen. The sound was stronger now, drifting from the church. He followed it across the silent market square, his breath clouding in front of him. The church tower loomed overhead, its great windows glowing faintly from within, though no services were scheduled. As he approached, the melody lilted, gathering dissonance like ice forming cracks. The door was closed now, but the music seeped through stone. He reached for the iron handle. The moment his fingers touched it, the door swung open inward, though he'd felt no pull. The church was dark. Only moonlight from the great windows lit the space, falling in pale squares across the floor. The choir stalls were empty again, their carved figures pulled into long, distorted shadows. The singing stopped. He almost whispered, "Hello?" again, but the word died when he saw them. 5 figures stood in the chancel, all cloaked, all hooded, their faces completely obscured. None moved, none breathed. For several seconds, Daniel remained frozen, staring at the silent row. The cloaks hung too straight, as if no bodies weighted them. He forced himself to step back, but the door behind him slammed shut. The sound echoed through the nave. The figures tilted their heads toward him in one slow, unified motion. Then the singing began, not with mouths. There was no movement beneath the hoods, but from the very air. Voices multiplied unnaturally, rising in close, impossible intervals, brushing against the harmonics of his own bones. The sound wrapped around him like cold fabric. Daniel clapped his hands over his ears. It didn't help. The notes reverberated inside him. "What do you want?" he gasped. The voices rose, twisting into a shape almost like speech. "Stay." The cloaked figures stepped forward without footsteps, just a sliding advance like shadow thickening. Daniel stumbled backward, striking the edge of a pew, the sound crescendoed, vibrating through the stone. "Please." The nearest figure extended an arm from its cloak. No hand emerged. Instead, the sleeve filled with a shape darker than darkness itself. Daniel bolted. He ran down the nave, breath tearing in his throat. The singing chased him, compressing around him, pushing into his skull. He reached the door, rammed it with his shoulder, and it gave. He fell out into the night air, gasping. Behind him, the music cut off instantly. When he turned, the church windows were dark. He staggered back to the inn, hands shaking so badly he could barely lock the door. Sleep came only in snatches. Each time he drifted off, he heard the faint suggestion of a chord rising out of silence. He left Northleach at dawn. Frost shone across the rooftops, the sky blush blue. The church tower looked ordinary again, a piece of medieval architecture catching the early light. But as he passed the lich gate, he saw movement inside the churchyard. A cloaked figure stood between two gravestones. He blinked, and it was gone. No footprints marked the frost, no disturbance at all, but as he drove away, he realized the humming in his bones hadn't faded. One note, held very quietly, beneath everything, as though something still sang inside him. The road up from Burford had looked harmless on the map. Mark Hale had driven the A-roads between Swindon and the Cotswolds often enough, but this year he wanted something different. Fewer taillights, less retail park glare. He left his parents' house in Cheltenham after an early Christmas Eve lunch, promising to take it steady and text when he arrived. When the sat-nav suggested the usual route, he zoomed out, spotted a thin white line crossing the high ground past Stowe, and chose that instead. A country Christmas, he thought. Snow on the hedges, maybe a glimpse of a lit church tower. By the time he passed Burford, the snow had lost its charm. Fine flakes hissed against the windscreen like static. The hedges were capped in white. The tarmac beneath his tires shone with a dangerous sheen. The world narrowed to two beams of light and a tunnel of falling snow. Should have stayed on the main road, he muttered. Stowe Hill announced itself gradually. The engine working harder, hedges dropping away, pale slopes vanishing into dark. Dry stone walls lay half buried in drift, gateposts opening onto fields that might as well have been the moon. Somewhere beyond the snow, the land fell away steeply, though he could no longer see where. The sat-nav lost signal with a small, apologetic chime. It's one road, Mark told himself. Just keep going. The first skid was small, the second was not. A gust rocked the car. The road dipped, cambered wrong, and the tires lost themselves on polished snow. The car slid sideways in a helpless arc and met the verge with a muted crunch. Silence followed. The engine idled. The snow hissed. Mark tried reverse, then first. Nothing. Snow had banked around the tires, holding the car fast. His phone showed a flicker of signal, then nothing. "Fine," he said aloud. "Someone will come." No one did. The temperature ticked down. The interior of the car felt suddenly fragile, a thin bubble of warmth pressed into a much larger cold. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The wind struck him like a shove. Snow lay ankle-deep, the gusts needling through his gloves. He walked a little way up the lane, calling out once, his voice snatched away almost at once. There were no lights, no houses, no glow of shelter, only the sound of snow moving across snow. Back in the car, the silence closed in more tightly than before. That was when he saw the lantern. At first he thought it was a reflection, then he turned and saw it properly. A single yellow light moving uphill, swinging with the rhythm of a carried lamp. Shapes gathered around it, a cart, horses, a man walking ahead. The sight stirred a flicker of relief so strong it almost hurt. Mark told himself it was a farm vehicle, anything modern. The wind dropped. Beneath the ticking engine, he heard the clink of harness and the dull thud of hooves. The procession followed a line that did not quite match the road, cutting across the angle of the hedge. Snow parted ahead of it in deep troughs. The air around the light seemed to darken, as though older weather pressed through. When it drew level with the car, Mark saw the man clearly. Coat hanging to his boots, shoulders hunched, face gaunt in the lantern glow, as though winter itself had pared him down. The cart made no sound. The hooves did. A heavy vibration felt more than heard. The man looked up. The lantern light slid across the windscreen and through Mark, as if he were made of glass. For a heartbeat, the man's eyes acknowledged him, not as a person, but as an obstacle. Then the cart rolled on, angling toward the drop, where the hill fell away. "Hey!" Mark shouted, flinging the door open. The wind tore the words away. Snow rushed in, blinding him. When he could see again, the lane was empty. No tracks, no cart ruts, only untouched drift. Shock, he told himself. You imagined it. Something moved in the mirror. A pale shape crouched by the rear tire. At first he thought it was a fox, then it turned its head, and he saw what was wrong. Too long in the body, limbs jointed oddly. Its fur was the color of old snow, streaked with gray. Its eyes reflected the red glow of the lights with an uncomfortable shine. It watched him patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. Its mouth opened a fraction, no teeth, only darkness. Then it moved. It flowed out from the shadow of the tire, leaving no prints. As it passed, the snow stiffened and glazed. It stopped near the open door and looked up at him. Mark had the sudden impression of a hand being held out, not kindly, not cruelly, simply indicating a way. The wind dropped again. Bells drifted through the storm, proper church bells, ringing a carol he half remembered. The smell of wood smoke curled through the car, warm and impossible, carrying with it the sense of rooms filled with voices and light. The creature turned toward the open hillside and took a few silent steps. "Should stay with the car," Mark said aloud, clinging to the sound of his own voice. The creature paused. Its gaze met his, and his thoughts blurred at the edges. The bells grew louder. He smelled mulled wine, roasting meat, crowded rooms. If he followed, he felt sure he would find warmth and welcome waiting just out of sight. It moved on. The snow underfoot changed, thinning treacherously. The hillside lost its shape. Sound seemed distant, his breathing oddly removed. He followed until his toes met emptiness. Snow broke away in silence. He flung his weight back just in time and stood shaking on the edge of a hidden drop. The creature stood on the far side, balanced, as if gravity did not apply. The bells soured, the notes dragging out of tune. Understanding came slowly. It had not been leading him to shelter. "Why?" he croaked. Images crowded his mind. Other winters, other stalled vehicles, figures drawn from safety into white darkness. Some returned, some did not. The creature opened its mouth wider. "Not tonight," Mark whispered. Something shifted. The bells faltered. The warmth vanished. The cold returned, sharp and real. The creature closed its mouth, studied him once more, then turned away. It walked along the far bank, fading step by step until the snow swallowed it entirely. Mark edged back from the drop and turned toward the lane. Through the storm, he saw a dim red glow. His own rear lights. He stumbled back to the car and collapsed inside. When he started the engine, the wheels found grip where none had been before. Slowly, the car freed itself. He drove down Stow Hill without once looking back. The next afternoon in Swindon, Mark searched for accidents on that stretch of road. There were many. Carts, coaches, cars lost in winter conditions. Most survived, not all. That night, lying awake, he heard faint bells through the heating, distant and uneven. Beneath them, a softer sound, like something sliding across snow. He whispered, "Find someone else's hill." The bells faltered, then the house settled, and the night became ordinary again. Maya Fielding booked the cottage because it looked safe. The listing promised cozy, characterful, centuries old. The photos were warm lamps and scrubbed beams, a small Christmas tree in the corner, and a kitchen window fogged with the promise of heat. She wanted one quiet night before the family circuit, a pause in the season where nobody asked questions she couldn't answer. The village arrived like a postcard pinned to darkness. Honeystone, a narrow lane between dry stone walls, wreaths and candle glow behind thick glass. Candle Lane had no street lamp. At the end of it, the cottage leaned toward the road as if listening. Maya found the key in the lockbox and let herself in. The door sighed, releasing stale warmth and a faint smell of pine cleaner over old soot. "One night," she said aloud, because silence made her nervous. Downstairs was neatly arranged, sofa, rug, a stack of local walk guides. In the corner stood the promised tree, small, tasteful, blinking slowly like a calm pulse. Upstairs, a steep staircase climbed to a narrow landing. A little card beside the bed read, "Please mind the stairs. They are original and steep." She made tea, ate a service station sandwich, and read until her eyelids drooped. Outside, snow began to fall, fine, dry flakes that didn't look serious until they'd been falling a long time. At 10, she turned off the lights, leaving only the tree glowing. Then she heard a sound overhead. Not the normal creak of an old house settling. A step, measured, deliberate, on the landing. A pause. Then another. Slow, careful, as though someone were testing each board before trusting their weight. Maya stared at the ceiling. "Very funny," she muttered, and went to wash her mug. The steps crossed overhead and stopped directly above the staircase. A soft drag followed, like a coat hem brushing the floor. Maya's mouth went dry. She climbed the steep stairs, one hand on the banister, and switched on the wall lamp. The landing was empty. The bedroom door at the end stood closed, exactly as she'd left it. She went inside and locked it, more from stubbornness than fear. She read for a few minutes, forcing her eyes to follow the lines. When she finally set the book down, a single tap came from the other side of the door. Not a knock, a fingernail. Maya slid out of bed. "Who is it?" she whispered. No answer. Another tap. Two quick ones, impatient. She yanked the door open. The landing was empty. Shadows pooled at the top of the stairs. Downstairs, the tree blinked calmly in the dark. Maya shut the door and locked it again, heart running ahead of her thoughts. She slept, but only in thin, broken strips. When she woke, it was still night. The heating had gone quiet. The room felt colder, as if the air itself had been exchanged. Her breath misted faintly. Downstairs, the Christmas tree lights clicked softly on and off. Her phone showed no signal. Maya sat up and listened. A whisper of movement rose from the stairs. Not overhead this time, but below. Step, pause, step, careful, patient, almost polite. She held her breath. Then, from the darkness beyond the door, a slow, shallow inhale, like air moving through cloth. Maya, her name, spoken as if it had been practiced. She snapped on the bedside lamp. The room filled with warm light. Nothing stood there. Nothing could stand there. The whisper came again, fainter. Maya. She got dressed with shaking hands and went to leave the room. The handle would not turn. She tried the lock. It clicked. She tried again. The door did not move, as though something heavy had settled against it from the other side. Panic rose, sharp and childish. "Stop it," she said, pressing her shoulder into the wood. "Open the door." Silence. Then, a single step on the landing directly outside. Light, precise, a pressure without weight. The handle moved slowly as if someone were testing it. Maya backed away, staring. She wanted to believe it was the owner playing some vile joke, but the cottage had been empty when she arrived, and Candle Lane outside was nothing but snow and dark. The handle stopped. A soft tap touched the door, like a fingernail again. Maya swallowed. "I'm leaving," she said. as if stating a fact could make it true. "I'm going downstairs." A pause, then the sound of the staircase, descending step by step, slow, patient, as if making room. The door gave suddenly, swinging inward hard enough to pull Maya forward. She stumbled into the landing, caught herself on the banister, and stared down the steep stairs. Below, the living room waited, dim and ordinary. The tree blinked. The rug lay flat. No shadows moved. Maya began to descend, keeping one hand on the banister, eyes fixed on the steps. Halfway down, she felt it. A presence behind her, close enough to press cold into the back of her neck. She did not turn. A whisper brushed her ear. "Careful." The word was not a warning, it was an instruction. Maya's foot slid, not on ice, not on dust, simply slid sideways, as if the stair had changed shape beneath her. She grabbed the banister. The wood tore heat from her palm. For a heartbeat, she balanced, weight tipping into empty space. Then something pushed, not a shove like a person would give, a steady, certain pressure against her shoulder blade, as though an unseen hand had decided precisely how she should fall. Maya went down the stairs in a brutal tumble, elbow, hip, head. Tree lights strobed through her vision. The smell of old soot filled her mouth. She landed twisted at the bottom, cheek against the rug, pain roaring and then thinning into numbness. She tried to move her legs. One responded weakly. The other did not. The room had gone very still. At the foot of the stairs stood a figure, held together by shadow and the faintest wash of pale light. A long coat, the suggestion of a brimmed hat. Where a face should have been there was mostly absence, except for a dim sense of eyes, fixed on her with intimate attention. Maya tried to scream. Nothing came out but a wet breath. The figure raised one arm, slowly, almost courteously. Behind it, the staircase seemed to deepen, not changing in shape, but in meaning. For an instant, Maya understood it as something far older than the cottage, a stair that had been counted down in darkness for years, for decades, for lifetimes. In the quiet, beneath the ticking lights of the tree, she heard footsteps on wood. Not one set, many, overlapping, descending, steady, patient, coming down to meet her. Maya clawed at the rug with numb fingers. Her phone lay out of reach, screen dark, useless. The figure leaned closer. The air smelled of wet wool, cold ash, and something faintly sweet, like cloves. "Maya," it whispered again, and this time her name felt like something being taken. The Christmas tree lights blinked once, twice, and went out. In the darkness, the footsteps continued their careful descent. They found the cottage 2 days later, when Candle Lane reappeared and the owner came to check on the booking. The stairs were steep, the owner said. Accidents happened. But when the paramedic turned Maya's coat to examine her injuries, he paused. Just below the shoulder blade, in the fabric, was a faint pattern, 4 narrow dents, and one slightly deeper than the rest, like fingers, pressed hard, like a hand choosing, carefully, where to push. Ethan Rook reached the inn just as the last color drained from the winter sky. The drive should have been easy, a quiet Christmas visit, one night on the road to avoid the worst of the holiday traffic. But the snow thickened into a steady curtain, and the lanes narrowed into white tunnels. Hedges rose on either side like walls, their branches bowed and glittering. The tires whispered on ice, a sound that made Ethan hold his breath without realizing it. When the sat-nav guided him into a village he didn't recognize, he slowed to a crawl, breath fogging the windscreen despite the heater, every instinct warning him that this was not a place he had intended to be. The inn appeared suddenly, a spill of warm light in the white. Its sign creaked on its chain, a painted stag, antlers branching like bare winter trees. Relief hit him so hard he laughed aloud as he pulled into the small gravel yard, snow crunching under the tires. For a moment he sat there with the engine running, hands on the wheel, listening to the wind scrape across the building like something testing its strength. Inside, the air was heavy with heat and wood smoke. A fire burned low in a wide hearth, its embers shifting with a faint, restless sound. Two other guests sat close to it with pints and phones, both wearing the same expression, grateful and faintly unsettled. They looked up as Ethan came in, nodded in the careful way of people who might be sharing the same inconvenience for the night but not much else. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. Slow, measured, deliberate, and then creaked again, as if answering itself. At the bar, the innkeeper, grey hair pinned neatly back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, slid him a key. "Room 7, she said. "End of the corridor. Road's closing up by the common, so you won't be going anywhere tonight." "That's fine," Ethan said, rubbing his hands together as feeling returned. "I only need a bed." She hesitated, eyes flicking to his face as if weighing the usefulness of a warning, then glanced briefly toward the ceiling. "And don't sing in the mirror," she added. Ethan blinked. "Sorry?" "A village joke," she said, though her mouth didn't quite manage a smile. "People get festive. Just don't." He laughed politely, unsure how else to respond, and took the key. Room 7 sat at the end of a low-ceilinged corridor where the floor sloped gently with age. The carpet was worn thin along the center, the walls leaning in the way of buildings that had learned to hold themselves upright by habit alone. The room itself was spare but clean. Single bed, small desk, wardrobe, and opposite the bed stood a tall mirror in a dark wooden frame, its glass foxed at the edges as if tired. Ethan stared at it longer than made sense. The longer he looked, the more the reflection seemed to deepen, as though the room behind him were larger than it should have been. With a faint shake of the head, he turned the mirror to face the wall. Downstairs, the inn settled early. Snow tapped the windows like fingernails. The fire was built up once more, then allowed to sink. At 9, the power blinked once and failed. There was no panic. Candles appeared with brisk efficiency, their flames steady despite the cold. The innkeeper moved among the tables with the air of someone who had done this many times before. Ethan climbed the stairs by candlelight. The corridor felt narrower now, the walls closer, the shadows heavier. When he shut his door, he stood still, listening. The inn breathed, beams contracting, the fire sighing, and beneath it, something else. A faint vibration, as though a note had been struck somewhere deep in the building and was still humming through the wood, too low to hear properly, but impossible to ignore once noticed. The singing began a few minutes later. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A carol drifted along the corridor, slow and uneven. The melody stretched thin in places and hurried in others, as if whoever sang it had learned by heart and the heart had frayed. The sound slid under the door and into the room, settling in the corners. Ethan sat up in bed, pulse knocking against his ribs. He told himself it was one of the other guests, half drunk and sentimental. He told himself that old buildings carried sound in strange ways. He opened the door a fraction. At the far end of the corridor, where it turned, the tall mirror stood, catching the candlelight like a pale mouth. Before it stood a man in a long, old-fashioned coat, head bowed, singing softly into the glass. His posture was careful, almost reverent, as though the mirror were an altar. His breath did not mist. Ethan eased the door shut and backed away, heart hammering. He waited for the singing to stop. It did not. A second voice joined in, his own. His mouth was closed, his tongue pressed hard against his teeth. Yet the corridor sang with his exact tone, the same slight rasp, the same way he flattened certain notes without meaning to. The harmony was perfect, too perfect. Panic sent him downstairs, feet skidding slightly on the worn steps. The innkeeper was waiting by the fire, iron poker in hand, as though she had never moved since he last saw her. The two other guests hovered nearby, drawn by the sound, their faces pale in candlelight. "You answered it," she said quietly. "I didn't," Ethan rasped, and the sound barely belonged to him. "It doesn't need much," she replied, "just the shape of a song, a little vanity, a little joy. Above them, the carol swelled. Ethan's voice, clear and effortless, rising where his own throat would not allow it. It filled the stairwell, pressing down like weight. The innkeeper struck the iron rail of the hearth. Clang. The sound was harsh and ugly, everything the carol was not. It rang through the room, flat and uncompromising. Clang. The tune faltered, tried to smooth itself back into harmony, then snagged like cloth on a nail. Clang. The singing collapsed into a thin hum, and then silence. No one spoke. They waited, listening. A soft step crossed the landing above, then another, slow, deliberate, then a gentle knock on the ceiling directly above them, once, twice. Very softly, Ethan heard his own voice speak from above, as if close to his ear, sing. His mouth opened before he could stop it. The urge was physical, to answer, to reclaim what had been taken, to prove that the voice was still his. His chest ached with it. The innkeeper struck the iron again, harder this time, sending a vibration through the floor and up the walls. The knock ceased. The silence that followed felt enormous, as though the building itself were holding its breath. By mid-morning, the storm eased. Snow sagged from hedges and slid from roofs in soft avalanches. The road reopened. Ethan left as soon as he could, thanking no one, throat raw, promising himself he would forget. That evening, safe in a bright kitchen miles away, a radio began to play a carol, cheerful and familiar. Ethan sang one perfect note, not by choice. Behind the dark window glass, something hummed the harmony, patient, waiting for Christmas to come round again. When the fires burn low and the last footsteps fade from the lanes, the Cotswolds return to themselves. At Christmas, the hills remember more than they show. Old roads soften beneath snow, staircases creak with the weight of years, and songs linger long after the singers are gone. Lanterns appear where no lamp should burn. Doors open onto warmth, or onto something colder that has been waiting patiently for the season to turn again. These stories are not meant to rush you. They belong to the long nights, the quiet hours when the world outside seems held in breath. Let them drift with you, like snowfall against a dark window, settling where they will. If you find yourself waking later with a half-remembered sound, bells out of tune, footsteps on stairs, a voice singing just beyond the glass, remember that winter has always been the time when such things draw closest. The old paths are still there, the cottages still listen, and Christmas will come round again. Until then, sleep well, and keep to the lantern light. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.